Upper Wye is deplorable now. Not only myself, I think every other fisherman and riparian owner on the Upper Wye has found over the years the deterioration has got to an extent that is costing not only the association but everyone else concerned with the Upper Wye fishery a lot of money. The trout shoals, the dace, the chub, the grayling, they've all gone. We've got to be concerned. Acid rain has got to be a major part of it. The improvement of the drainages, particularly with the forestry, the new pesticides that the farmers are using, I think it all stems to man's own doing, really.
The river here is very acidic. We know that the pHs, the means by which we measure acidity, go very low, which means there is a lot of acid present. And at the same time, the aluminium concentrations associated with that acidity are very high. And those kind of conditions are, for example, toxic to fish, which might occur in this system. The river here, for example, has no salmon in it whatsoever. It's unsuitable for salmon to spawn in. And rivers around this area in general also have very low populations, very low densities of brown trout. This really is very, very impoverished. We would be expecting to see many more species of insects in this stream than we are doing. Certainly several key groups such as mayfly nymphs and some caddis larvae, some other large insects, are absent from this site. Certain organisms, fish are amongst them, birds or others, depend on these kind of insects, obviously for food, and in this case these organisms are absent. We are on the River Tyrennig, a catchment in the Wye which is now about 50% covered by conifer forest. We know that conifers make the water more acidic and also lead to higher aluminium concentrations.
There has been a decline in the brown trout population, and this seems to be something that is happening in many other rivers other than the Wye. In certain locations you can put a reason to it, acidification perhaps, and other areas the reason isn't quite so clear and obvious. And a lot of our research work is designed to try and answer some of these problems. We're at the forefront of the research work at the moment on acidification, and jointly funded schemes with the Department of the Environment are sponsoring the work we are doing and have been doing for some years now on identifying the problems where acidification occurs, how it acts on the environment and on the fish, and what measures might be taken to ameliorate the effects. I think there's no point at the moment, certainly, in restocking. Some of the research in terms of what one could do about acidification are geared to discovering which strains of fish perhaps are more resistant to the acid waters than others, and in time that might be one avenue. And they're also looking obviously at ways that forestry is carried out and the way that it's ploughed and liming and various other aspects of how one might deal with the problems of acidification. But in the Wye catchment, it is a very small part of our catchment that is affected indeed, and we are talking very much of the headwaters upstream of Llangurig and a couple of the tributaries.
The people of Breda have as such taken the law into their own hands. The Triangle Conservation Club proposed to the Welsh Water Authority a scheme on introducing trout under Breda Bridge and making it into a conservation pool. The reply from the Welsh Water Authority was totally negative. Wasting your time, wasting your money, the fish won't stay there. A week or so later, A riparian owner further up the river approached the Welsh Water Authority. They've told him exactly the same. But does the Welsh Water Authority know something that the local fishermen don't? We have this morning introduced 100 14-inch brown trout into the conservation pool here at Rhaeadr. We may lose some, but on the other hand, we may keep them. And there's a great possibility that they may spawn. What's got to be beneficial for the fishermen, and not only for the fishermen, but for the River Wye up in the Rhaeadr area.
I think there are a whole host of reasons why salmon stocks are in decline, certainly fewer than they were sort of 20, 30 years ago. They're caught legally and illegally at every sort of stage of their life cycle, and there's been an increase in the amount of netting in the high seas, and of course there is a serious salmon poaching problem. I think the problems with poaching and detecting the poacher as the size of the area is concerned. We've got sort of 120, 130 miles of River Wye to patrol, with not an enormous bailiff force by any means, and consequently to hit the right spot on the right night at the right time is a problem.
When the back end goes in water in with the compartment up. You just have to lift it out there and have the wet stuff.
What we try to do with the few men we've got is to cover a lot of ground. So if you break a part of the river up into A, B, C, A and B would be a foot patrol duty, where the bailiffs would probably hide up on the river bank on good pools where we know there's probably going to be poached or will be poached. When the poachers arrive to do their evil doings, the bailiffs pounce on them and catch them. And then probably from B to C, the boat patrol would do, and that would give us quite a long stretch of river to cover or disturb this fishing. They're looking for poachers' nets which have been set in the river to illegally take fish. They're most highly organised. They travel in good vehicles, poor vehicles. They have radio equipment, radio scanning gear. Scanners are for scanning radio frequencies to listen into the water bailiff's frequency, and also the other services such as police, and they're quite efficient. We had a dinghy one night with 5 nets. In the dinghy were 45 salmon. Now, if you average the weight of the salmon at 10 pounds in weight each, that's 450 pounds of fish. And the current market price for selling fish into fishmongers was £3 a pound. So 3 times 450 gives you what, 1,300 pounds roughly, 12 to 1,300 pounds. Not a bad reward for 4 or 5 hours work. They do turn violent. I think it's over 3 or 4 nights. We've had nasty incidents with the boat travelling on the river like we're doing tonight. When it goes under a convenient bridge over the river, we've had concrete blocks and bricks and iron bolts and stones thrown down at the bailiffs. It's not a very nice experience. Move our patrol to boat patrol. What's your position now, please, over?
Within the last half mile, over.
Have you seen anything? Have you had any luck? Picked anything up at all?
Or has it been a blank night, over?
Regards picking some of it up, it's been a blank night. But we have found 3 toys that have been used fairly recently, over.
Success rate is very difficult to assess because the police do have reported crimes. Everybody, if they burgle, will report it to the police. But with us, nobody reports poaching. If nobody sees them or the bailiffs don't catch them, there is no record of that offence taking place. So it's something that you really cannot give a success rate on. I shouldn't think it's a very high one. they've got an excellent chance of getting away with it.
One of the major problems we've had is the question of mink on the river. And the mink have, in the last 20 years, spread throughout the whole of the watershed of the Wye. The mink has no predator. It's a killer, and it's a killer of either fish or bird life.
We have to fight our way through this bit. That brook mouth might be as good a place as any.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
On the lower Wye, it's undoubtedly eliminated all the water hens, a lot of the other birds, sand martins, dippers, wagtails, waterside birds. Young mallard particularly have suffered.
I reckon there's been one come out the water there, look.
Yeah, you can see now the water level's
there.
gone down.
I'll tell you what, up
Yeah.
under that what's it wouldn't be a bad place.
Yeah, it's a good
Yeah,
place there.
yeah, look.
Duck, isn't it, George?
Yeah, little duckling, look.
Yeah,
2 days old. Look at
yeah. Yeah,
Typical mink
typical,
work.
yeah.
One should attempt to control the mink, otherwise the bird life, the wildlife of the river will inevitably suffer.
You got a new in here this time?
A number of the tributaries of the Wye, which are good trout stream, have their stocks of trout diminished, and there are no trout in them, unless in fact they are stocked with rainbows. The mink have put paid to that. So we continue our campaign on mink, and I think I've been reasonably successful in the last, certainly this year, it's over 100 mink have been accounted for.
That'll do there then.
Yeah, that's right.
The mink, having no predator, will just spread continually, inevitably, and has done throughout all the rivers in England.
That's right. Play a bit of that, mate.
Good. Should do. The old Himalayan balsam.
The mink has won the battle. Welsh Water Authority used to offer £2 for a pelt, but in 1985 they withdrew that. The mink won, and the mink then was called feral mink, which meant it was an indigenous species of our mammal, rather like the grey squirrel.
See how we've gone on then.
Yeah, let's hope we got a bit of luck.
Yep.
Grand job.
All right, anyway. Good morning.
It is, isn't it? You see the river's gone down this morning, George.
I don't know. It doesn't look like it's fallen a lot to me.
There's some
It's
colour
a
in the
nice
water this morning,
Nice
mate.
morning, though.
Yeah, it's
Sure.
beautiful. Looks good.
We got one.
That's great.
Ah, yes. Look at that. Grey dog mink.
All right, good one, isn't he?
He's a good one.
Yeah,
He's big one.
he's a great.
Yeah, there.
Lovely job.
Right then.
The river was used probably from time immemorial as a means of transport, but the main use of it was during the 17th, 18th and early 19th centuries until the railways came along in the middle of the 19th century. And of course from there onwards the use of the river as a navigable waterway for trade completely ceased. The idea that navigation starts at Hay, or possibly at Glaisbury, seems to have happened in the last 100 or 150 years. Probably because there was very little barge traffic above Hay. And of course with the total lack of use of the Wye as a navigable waterway for 70 or 80 years, the upper Wye was the part that was most affected. Since then, I think it's just been the landowners who feel that they have a private river and that no one else should use it as a public highway.
Well, in 1985, we put forward what we considered to be reasonable proposals for a further access agreement. And these were that we should canoe the river the whole of the close season, that is when the salmon fishermen didn't want it. When the river is in spate, and again they don't want it because it's too high, and 50% of the rest of the year. And we made it clear that we were very flexible in this, and if there were parts of that 50% that they particularly wanted to fish, we would stay off. But we felt that as we had a right to canoe it all the time, if we were saying that we would only canoe it 50% of the time, but they could fish all the time, that this was quite reasonable. But I regret to say that they regarded our proposals as absolutely outrageous and out of the question.
The owners of the fishing on the Upper Wye have always tried to share the river with canoers and nature lovers and all sorts of members of the public, provided that it didn't interfere with the fishing. The odd canoeist who will slip down river quietly and keep out of the way if people are fishing does no harm at all. But if you get a party canoeing down and they tend to stop where the water is rough, and by the very nature of things they will capsize, they have to get out on the bank, dry themselves out, that is the sort of thing which upsets both the peace and quiet of the river and indeed will upset the fish. When the British Canoe Union claimed on behalf of their members that there was a public right of navigation above Hay-on-Wye, the owners got together and financed the best legal opinion in London, who assured them that there was no evidence that there was a public right-of-way or a public right of navigation on the Upper Wye.
The Upper Wye was obviously used from time to time, perhaps not so much by barges and large boats, but certainly for the movement of timber. And in the Hereford Times in 1793, there is in fact an advertisement for large oak timber available in Radnorshire, and it mentions at the bottom that the said timber is in a desirable situation for transport down the Wye to Chepstow. And of course the use of the river for floating timber down is a legitimate navigational use. The Acts themselves mention the River Wye in Herefordshire, Gloucestershire and Monmouthshire, and adjacent counters. The only adjacent counters, of course, are Brecon and Radnorshire. So there's really no question that the whole of the Wye wasn't affected, and not just the part in England.
The two sports ought to be able to coexist together, and we mustn't forget that navigation rights are paramount in law, fishing rights are secondary. But we've had a lot of difficulty with violence and intimidation. People having stones thrown at them, 3-hook lures cast repeatedly at them. People have been hooked in the clothing torn, and in the flesh, and flesh torn. People have been physically abused on and off the water, pushed in, pushed about, threatened. Canoeists have had paddles taken away, and police have had to be called to retrieve them. Drivers acting in support have been harassed and verbally abused and threatened. It really has been very difficult. Mainly the gillies, I must say, doing this, but now and again an owner steps in and does a little bit himself.
We've been in negotiation for about 3 years with the British Canoe Union to allow fairly unrestricted canoeing out of the salmon fishing season. And that is roughly from the end of September right through until the beginning of January. And the people who canoe on the Upper Wye are experts because it's a dangerous river. And in the days now of wetsuits, they can canoe just as well in the winter as in the summer. In addition to that, they were offered 5 free days fishing in July and August for the holiday canoeists, and they were offered canoeing when the river was too high for fishing or when the height of the river made damage by canoeists unlikely.
The fishermen obviously don't agree that there's a right of navigation. The canoeists say that there is, and the only way to ever prove it would be taking litigation, which would cost everybody a lot of money. And at the end of the day, we've still got to negotiate with everybody so that we can all use the river in peace.
Well, the Wye is a navigable river from Hay downstream to Chepstow. That's something like 100 miles. And there the public has a right of navigation once they've gained lawful access to the river.
Midland Bank maintaining a lead over Lensbury.
There is no navigation authority, and it isn't the Welsh Water Authority, and we haven't taken on the powers or tried to gain those powers. We've approached it from a slightly different angle. We are part sponsoring a project officer who's starting work in the area in the next few weeks, who has a long-term project of identifying the problem areas and coming up in consultation with all the interested bodies with some solutions to the problem.
That's it! Last 10 then! Let's lift up! Now go, go, go! Come on, back him up, Thomas! That's better! That's better! Good! Now we're beginning to...
We used to, in the winter, enjoy rows down from Hereford down to Monmouth, a distance of 50 miles. We can't do that anymore because of the number of salmon croys that have been built in the river, and that makes rowing very dangerous, can rip the bottom out of an 8,000-pound shell, and one just don't do that.
Day and night. Work in the water and...
When you talk to the game anglers, they're talking to you, but they're not very keen for you to talk to them. I wouldn't say they're uncooperative, but they're not particularly helpful. They see that they have a right that they quite naturally wish to safeguard, and we have a right to navigate, and we wish to safeguard that as well.
Basically, we choose the Wye because it's a nicely graded piece of water for young people to come down especially. So we tend to bring the young people each year. And it's such a beautiful river to be on, and the scenery is magnificent. The appeal of canoeing, I think, is that it's almost going back a long way to the sort of trapping days, if you like. It's the loneliness of it all. It's being able to see the world from a totally different angle. It's peaceful, it's quiet, the river's there to be enjoyed. We can travel down it quietly, efficiently, and leave no real scars that we've been there. I suppose if someone pays a great deal of money to fish for a weekend on a river, the last thing you really want is about 20 canoeists going past.
When you change the hot drink back to the loo, okay? Don't stand around and get too cold then.
Soup's ready! Come and get it while it's still hot!
Do what they do in New Zealand.
Any good, Jeffrey? Oh, well done.
Two on bait.
People pay quite a lot of money in some parts of the river to fish. In terms of individual fisheries, it will vary with the quality of that particular beat. But, you know, some people on the better beats might pay up to as much as 1,500, 1,600, 1,700 pounds for one rod for a day for the season, and of that season probably they might only get fishing 16, 17 days. At the lower end of the scale, you could fish a private beat perhaps elsewhere for 200, 250.
Chateau Ross-on-Wye. Jeffrey, glass of wine. Here's the fish.
It's amazing the amount of violence that these poachers
Oh yes,
would
I
offer
remember
you.
that in the old days, 25 years ago up at Rudder.
But we would be bombed off the bridges with,
Oh,
you
yes,
know.
they did over the chap up at Rudder.
The start of the National Anti-Angling Day. So let's have a drink to make certain that it fails.
Here's to that.
It's a free country, and anybody can do what they want. But there's no reason why you should interfere with other people's enjoyment and sport. The Wye Preservation Trust is in being to make sure that no one interested party spoils the fun of another.
Well, we've all got to get on together, haven't we?
That's
Well,
right.
I mean, that applies right through the country and everywhere else. We've got to get on together.
Well, come on then, come and get me. I don't want this boat.
What we want to do is to, at all times, avoid conflict. It's fully recognized, I think, that the necessity to have a navigation authority, not to restrict and deny people the fact that they can enjoy canoeing or raft racing, which is raises a lot of money for charity. It merely wants to be regulated with people looking after professionally those particular aspects which form all the activities which go under recreation, amenities, navigation.
They're trying to get rafting off the river. They've managed to get the hovercrafts and the jet boats off. Now rafting is the next line. Even though we're 11 years rafting for charity, they still don't accept us. And it never will blend. I know that it will never meet a status quo at all. The common occurrence is the fishing lines are cast across the raft. We had an incident about 6 weeks ago when one of the crew members nearly lost his eye on a multi-hook line. We've established good dialogue with the local salmon fishing committee, and we have good dialogue with them. We now have the River Wye Preservation Trust that have set themselves up with representatives from all walks of life, so they say. That you have a conservationist, you have the RSPB, who are both anglers, might I add. The majority of the committee have as a secondary interest fishing at heart. We get around the table. I feel that in the main things are thrashed out around the table, and then I suddenly read in the newspaper that things are being said that hasn't even come to committee. I find that incredible when dialogue is supposed to be set up.
I don't suppose you'll ever get a satisfactory resolution to everybody, but I think there's got to be a resolution, and I think that has to come through a public body introducing controls which may not always be acceptable to all of us and any of us at any particular point in time, but which at least perhaps controls the amount of boating or the time of boating and so on. I think there has to be some sort of control that people can lean on. You find, and we've experienced it even as fishermen, if you introduce voluntary controls, they don't really work. If you introduce legislation, people say, well, I'm a law-abiding citizen, I abide by it.
Bring it, Mark. That's it, well done. Come on, we want a bit of light here.
Yeah.
That's better, I can see now. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
What about that floodlight over there? Ain't that good?